Thank you for the invite for the Sharq Forum. Happy to be here again. It's very hard to speak after everyone has spoken, so I will be much briefer than I was planning. I summed up some of the major economic issues in the Middle East and the region in general, and I'll explain them a little bit. I believe the number one issue is the lack of the rule of law. If you look at foreign direct investment, the money likes to go to safe places where they can invest safely. There's a very clear rule of law, a very clear enforcement of the rule of law, court and judicial system. When we look at the Middle East, and particularly we look at North Africa and the Levant, we see a system that is not very clear, and it really depends on whom you know to get a judicial decision in your favor, and not really a very clear and transparent process. Talking about transparency, if you look at the Transparency International ranking of Middle Eastern nations, we'll see most of them rank very low on the ranking. If we look at the 2015 report, as I remember, I think Qatar and the UAE are number 22 and number 23, and then we jump 20 steps to Jordan at number 45, and then we jump another 20 steps when we get to Oman, and then another 28 steps when we get to Egypt, Algeria, and Morocco. And at the lower rank, globally, we can find Sudan and Somalia and some other regional countries. So there is an extreme lack of transparency and accountability across the region, and that is, of course, problematic for business. Another issue which it's very important to myself as a previous businessman in the Middle East and globally is the lack of finance. There's not really clear path toward finance for enterprises. And I can give you a number from a World Bank report. For example, in Egypt, 37% of firms say the number one issue is the lack of finance, and only 17% of them have access to finance. But if you look at the small and medium-sized enterprises, only 13% has access to finance. And if we look at the new investment that's being financed by the banks, only 7% are financed by the banks in Egypt, as compared to 13% in the MENA region and 18% globally by the banks. If we look at the capital market finance for new business, it's even worse. It's only 4%. Globally, it's around 20%, and the Middle East is just 4% that finance through the capital market, either the debt market or the stock market. So it's a really dire problem. And in some countries, Egypt is one of them, if we see 90% of bank loans, it goes to less than 1% of clients. So there's 1% of the whole business community is getting over 90% of the loans, and this way, I'm sure you have better the number than I have now. But there's an extreme lack of finance. And then if we look at the innovation finance, the venture capital finance, basically there's no appetite for risk in the Middle East for venture capital and entrepreneurship. I have done entrepreneurship ventures in the US and in Singapore, and I would say it's relatively easy to get finance for a small innovation project. And I've seen companies either in Silicon Valley or in Chicago who are willing to take a risk on 10 projects, knowing that they're going to lose money on 7, 8 of them. But they know they're going to make the money, more than the money on 1 or 2. Sometimes you can make, 20 times the money and so on. And I have seen companies or small innovation companies as an exception in Egypt who once they become successful, once they develop a technology, and in particular the company I used to know in Cairo, it was an innovation by about 12 young engineers out of Cairo and Ain Shams University. They developed a technology to squeeze more of the bandwidth for the data, and they got bought by a multinational in California, and for over $100 million. But the $100 million were never deposited in an Egyptian bank, and the whole team was flown to California, and now they have their office in California. So Egypt as a country didn't really get any of that, any of the innovation, any of the money. And the reason why is the lack of finance in the region for risk. If we look at trade and regional cooperation, Middle Eastern countries, particularly Arab countries and Islamic countries, rank very low on inter-regional trade between themselves. If you compare to Latin America, Asia, South Asia, Africa, Europe. I looked at some numbers before we started, and the size of trade between Arab countries is about $2.2 trillion. That sounds like a great number. It's almost like a little bit under 2% of the global trade. But 2 trillion of that is only energy. It's only gas and oil. So the rest is either food and manufacturing and so on. So less than 10% of the trade between Arab countries is actually goods. And regional cooperation takes us to the freedom of movement. There is not really a lot of freedom of movement. And this actually applies to Turkey, because Turkey is very open for freedom of movement for the regional countries around them, and for Middle East and Africa in general. It's very easy for people to come to Turkey and do business in Turkey. But if you look at other countries, I'm Egyptian, for example. It's very hard for me to go to Algeria, for example, or Morocco, or Iraq, or do business around the region. There's the issue of visas and the issues of the rules and so on. And if we look at the human capital, aside from the freedom of movement, either the use, 20 million new use, 100 million jobs are needed in the next 20 years across the region, and there's nothing remotely near that is being developed right now. Plus data, I think just 100, but 7 or 8 million jobs are probably in the pipeline for the next 10 years. We need 100 million. So, but when we look at human capital across the region, most countries, most state nations, they look at the human capital as a burden and not as an asset. I studied in Chicago. One of the main assets of any business is the human capital. The main asset of any nation is the human capital. And, you invest in education and training, and you develop the people, and you build the country, and you increase the productivity, and you increase the output of the whole country. While, and if we look at countries, Syria before the war, Egypt right now, we have the nation state, the nation mother, who has to provide to everyone subsidies and food and energy and so on, and not look at them as a source of future innovation, future economics, and future output. Just look at them as a burden. And my last point, when I look at the policies, economic policies in the region, most of it is what I like to call reactionary policies. The lack of real long-term strategic policies economically and monetary, financially. If we look, for example, at the Gulf right now, Saudi Arabia is starting their goals and slashing the salaries and slashing the subsidies and the system. 5 years ago, they were overspending, they lavishly overspending. So it's usually reactionary policies to either conflict or either the price of oil, of the change of socioeconomics with no long-term plans. What is the answer? And I go back, some people talk about democracy and about pluralism and so on. But for myself, as an economist and a businessman, I go back to the rule of law. I would like to see a rule of law before anything else. I would like to see a high level of justice across the region, and that will deliver prosperity. But if you don't have justice and a clear court system, you will not have any kind of prosperity. Thank you.